Earlier this week, on this platform, we hosted a political debate with 4 of the candidates standing for the Auckland Central electorate. And one of the topics that was raised by some of the candidates in their opening statements and by the moderator, Simon Wilson, in the questions he put to the candidates was safety in the city. It's understandable that some people are feeling uneasy and threatened following the recent shootings, homicides, and other violent incidents. These are on top of vehicle and property thefts. Now, the response from the law enforcement agencies and politicians alike is that the situation is not simple or straightforward. We know that the underlying social issues amongst those who live and visit the city centre are many and complex. But what will not help is crime and safety being used as a political football. For I believe that doing so does not address the issues and increases fear and insecurity. And what struck me today when I read both of the readings, one from 1 Kings and the one from Matthew's Gospel, was the theme of being fearful. In the reading from 1 Kings, we're told that Elijah, despite being faithful to what he has been called to be and do, is feeling alone, fearing for his life. After an order to kill Elijah was made by Queen Jezebel, the former confident and commanding man became fearful. He ran into the desert. He hid in a cave. When he journeys to Horeb, Mount Sinai, Elijah is part of an interaction between human thought, action, and limitation on one hand, and God's direction on the other. God is not in the wind. God is not in the earthquake. God is not in the fire. God is in the silence. It was not the impressive or magical that confirmed God's presence to Elijah. Elijah was not distracted by the powerful, the political, the destructive. God is in the still, small voice. Elijah was overwhelmed by life. He'd temporarily lost his perspective. And so do we. For many of us, Sunday worship is a time when we can gather with others on a similar path, listening for the still, small voice that reminds us what we are doing together, what we seek, what we hope, and what challenges us. Then in Matthew's Gospel, Peter, despite being a fisherman and being used to the sea, is fearful for his life and all who are on the boat with him. For in Jewish culture, the sea represented threat. It was linked to the abyss, the deeps. If you can imagine your deepest fear, that was how Peter felt and the other disciples. The literal storm, our metaphorical storms of life, is viewed as being deep and all-consuming. And so when we're told that Peter and the disciples saw the figure of Jesus walking on the water, it was huge. Peter, so overawed by the moment that he requests Jesus to call him and, once invited, steps out of the boat and begins walking on the water. But then his uncertainty, his fear, means he starts doubting and sinking. We're told Peter cries out, "Jesus, save me." Peter, who has overcome his deepest fear, is invited and brought back into the boat. And then even, we are told, the wind and the waves are stilled. Now, one thing to note is that we are told that Jesus headed out to the boat before anyone had asked to see him. And we know that there are no shortage of storms in our own lives, the lives of people around us. There are times when we feel particularly tossed about by waves, when we're fearful, when grief overwhelms us, life changes, potential disasters, all that rises up and wears us out. If we think then about the actions of Peter, he stepped out with confidence, and even when his confidence waned and he was literally sinking into his deepest fears, on calling out, he knew he was not alone. The Christ figure reassured the disciples, stilled the storm. A direct cry yielded the response, we're told, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." When we never step outside of this chaos, it is difficult to see beyond it. It's easy to think that that is all there is. And for some, it is important to have an external saviour, a call answered literally or figuratively. Reaching out may be a recognition that there is a need for something greater than self to bring about change. For all of us, we can see what Jesus models in the act of stepping away to pray, of becoming quiet, of returning with a steadiness that can then meet those who are so anxious that they cry out for help. Now, it's not always possible for us to do as Jesus did and take himself away to quiet places. It might be due to pressures of work, of family, of sick family members, or our own health. However, all of us can seek ways to lessen the distractions around us. Maybe turning off our phone, the computer, sitting looking out at the amazing sunrises and sunsets we've been having recently. Living an intentional, simple, and perhaps less consumeristic life. Last Friday was the feast day of Clare of Assisi. She was a contemporary of St. Francis and founded the religious order, the Poor Clare Sisters. As a young aristocratic woman, at the beginning of the 13th century, Clare was inspired to follow the radical new gospel life modelled by Francis. She was a revolutionary. She embraced poverty and created a way in which women could live a communal life and work to sustain that life, rather than being beholden to family wealth or patronage. Clare, in her life, reminds us that we become what we love, and what or who we love shapes what we become. If we love nothing, we become nothing. Now, she chose to shed all her possessions and external distractions. That might not be feasible for us. But she also loved God, and the image of God transformed her and allowed her to have a total, compassionate love for each and every one. And yet, at the same time, she wanted a life that was not siloed from the real world, or indeed the monastic life of the Franciscan brothers, or indeed the institution of the church. The space to be quiet, the space to hear the still, small voice of God, opens up new perspectives for us on what is possible, on what we are called to do. We often think of it as an individual activity or pursuit, yet seeking a quiet place can be collective. A way to help us to be aware and respond to our collective fears, the fears of the city, as well as giving us the space to meet others with their complex social needs. Despite what is going on in our lives and the world, all our fears and failings, we are loved, we are valued. And so Elijah's humanity is both encouraging and comforting. Peter's faith, then cry for help, is assuring us that God is indeed more faithful even in the face of our fear. And Claire models a simplification of life, not just for her own benefit, but so that all can share compassionate love. So this week I encourage all of us, when worries or fears arise, let's think about something that we can do. It might be simple as taking a deep breath, to ask atua, wairua, love, Christ, to be present. Whatever we acknowledge internally or externally, may it give us fresh eyes to see the way forward, to see what is possible. All this begins in a quiet moment, that still, small voice. Amen.